Hello. I'm just having breakfast. As you know, when you boil a kettle, there's always lots of steam around. That's because some of the water changes from a liquid into steam, which is water vapor. So, there's water vapor from the kettle, water vapor from my coffee cup, and water vapor from the water in which my egg is boiling. We call the change from water to water vapor evaporation. I like a little salt on my egg. In fact, salt is made from a process of evaporation, as Beverley's been finding out.
I'm near Northwich in Cheshire, where I've come across this unusual road sign. The sign's here because just down the road, water vapour is being given off in the making of salt.
This saltworks is one of the oldest in an area famous for producing salt.
Below the ground, some salt is found as a solid, but some salt is dissolved in water, like this sample.
This is called brine, and it's 8 times saltier than seawater. First, the brine has to be pumped up from 50 metres below ground level. Then it passes along pipes to the large storage tank. Inside the saltworks, the brine is fed into large shallow pans like this. And next door, the brine is pouring into a full working pan. The whole pan house is filled with clouds of water vapour rising from the brine. That's because underneath the pan is a row of oil burners which keep it very hot. And it's this heating which makes the water in the brine evaporate as water vapour, which fills the works and escapes through the roof. So you can see the reason for the road sign. As the water vapour evaporates from the brine, the salt is left behind. It falls to the bottom of the pan and can be raked to the side as white lumps of salt crystals. The salt is then scooped up and tipped into tubs. It's a constant process, heating the brine to evaporate the water so the salt can be collected. The tubs are left to drain until the salt has formed into blocks. Then the blocks are placed in a long low room called a stove, which is also heated from below by the oil burners. The blocks are placed on the very hot floor for 1 week and then off the floor for a final week. In the warm, dry stove, any water left in the blocks can evaporate, leaving pure, dry salt, all ready to be used.
Sawing logs is hard work. I'm hot and I'm sweating. But when the sweat evaporates, it'll cool me down. Rugby players get hot and sweaty during a game. On a cold day, you can see a cloud of water vapour rising from the scrum. The players' sweat is evaporating, and this will cool them down. After a race, horses are very hot too. On a cold day, you can see the water vapour in their hot breath, and water vapour coming from their bodies as their sweat evaporates. This will cool them down.
Didcot power station in Oxfordshire generates large quantities of electricity. The process uses a lot of cold water, and at Didcot they pump 200 million litres of water a day from the River Thames. This passes to the power station, and in making electricity, this cold water becomes warm. It's the cooling towers which cool the water so it can be reused in the power station or safely returned to the river. Each tower is concrete, hollow, and very large.
In this pipe, the heated water is brought from the power station into the cooling tower. So let's test the water temperature.
"21 degrees! Returning water that hot would harm the river's fish and other life. To see what happens to the warm water, let's go into the cooling tower. And this is inside a cooling tower. It's full of water vapour. Here, the warm water from the large pipe passes into smaller pipes and is then squirted out of nozzles which split the water into tiny droplets. These become even smaller when they hit the wooden slats below. Some of the water in the warm droplets evaporates as water vapour, which rises up inside the cooling tower until it escapes as a cloud at the top. This evaporation has a cooling effect, and the cooler water falls into the pool at the bottom of the cooling tower.
So this is where the water comes out of the cooling tower. So let's check the temperature of that. Well, that's 9 degrees.
So the cooling tower has reduced the water temperature so it can be safely returned to the river or reused in the power station.
Not bad. But have you ever thought how paint dries? Well, with watercolour like this, the water evaporates as water vapour into the air, leaving the paint to form a dry film. But paint dries more quickly on some days than others. Beverley's been finding out.
I've come to Darwin in Lancashire to see how quickly paint dries in different weather conditions. But we don't have to go outside and wait for the weather to change. This cabinet can change the weather for us. For the test, I'm using a tin of water-based paint. First, the cabinet must be completely sealed, then I can change the weather inside. Let's make it a hot day in the cabinet. The moisture gauge also shows it's dry. For the test, the cabinet must stay locked, so I have to work through rubber gloves fixed to the glass door. The paint has to be spread evenly over the card. For the paint to dry, the water in the paint must evaporate as water vapour, so the paint forms a dry film. To find the time it takes to dry, I set the stop clock. Remember, the cabinet was set to hot, and the thermometer reads 24 degrees, so it's a hot, dry day in there. 5 minutes have gone, so let's see if the paint is dry. Blue sand in a funnel is released by opening the clip. The sand runs out and onto the paint card below. The grains of sand stick to the paint, showing it's still wet. 10 minutes are up, so let's repeat the test. This time, some of the sand sticks, but the rest runs off the paint. After 20 minutes, all the sand runs off. None of the grains are sticking, so the paint's dry. On a hot, dry day, the water has evaporated from the paint in 20 minutes. Now let's change the conditions inside the cabinet to cold and dry, and paint an identical card and see how long it takes to dry. It's pretty cold inside, only 6 degrees. After 5 minutes, the sand sticks, so the paint's wet. After 10 minutes, the paint's still wet. 20 minutes was the time taken for the paint to dry on a hot day, but on a cold day, it's still wet. We have to wait for 35 minutes for the sand to run off, showing the paint's dry. On a cold day, the water takes longer to evaporate from the paint. Now let's make the cabinet hot again, but this time instead of dry, let's make it damp, so it's like a misty day. Again, I paint a card and set the clock. This time the moisture gauge shows it's very wet inside. There's a lot of water vapour in the air and even droplets of water on the glass. After 10 minutes, the paint's still wet. After 20 minutes, it's still wet. It's the same after 30 minutes. The air in the cabinet is already full of water vapour and can't take any more. The water in the paint isn't able to evaporate. Paint just doesn't dry on a very damp day. A warm, dry day is definitely the best for drying paint quickly.
When I breathe on this cold glass, droplets of water form. That's because the water vapour in my hot breath is cooled on the cold glass and changes to water. We call this condensation. Condensation is when water vapour cools back to water. But condensation can be a problem.
Condensation frequently happens in the bathroom. Water vapour from the hot water condenses back to water on the cold mirror round the bath. When the warm water vapour hits the cold side of the mixer tap, it condenses and droplets form. The bathroom window is covered with water droplets. The window's cold, so the water vapour condenses, making the window very wet. There are water droplets on the wash basin mirror too. Condensation can also occur in the kitchen. A boiling kettle creates a lot of water vapour. It condenses as water and streams down the cold kitchen windows. And there's even condensation in the car. On a cold day, the water vapour in your hot breath condenses on the windows and you can't see through them.
Condensation in the house was a nuisance, but in the car it's very dangerous. With the windows all misted up, you just can't see to drive safely. And it's a particular problem with the rear window because I can't reach to wipe it clear. And that's why the manufacturers have been testing ways to reduce condensation on this window.
Here at the Glassworks in St Helens, they make car rear windows. Each screen passes under a printer which deposits zigzag lines of silver ink on the surface of the glass. When the glass is toughened, they'll become permanent. These lines will carry an electric current, so checks are made to see that the lines are not broken. To test the hotline, the screen is placed in a test cabinet in front of a picture of a busy road, so it looks like the back window in a car. This inner side of the screen is open, so it's the same temperature as the factory, 8 degrees. Here's the back of the cabinet and the back of the picture with the cars on. In the sealed space between the picture and the window, the air temperature is reduced to minus 20 degrees. That's very cold.
So our rear screen is under the same conditions as in the car. Cold on the outside and warm on the inside. Well, let's wait and see what happens.
The screen mists up as water vapour in the warm air this side of the screen hits the cold glass and condenses. After half an hour, the whole screen is covered with water droplets.
Well, I certainly couldn't see much through there.
So, let's switch on the hotline and time its effect. An electric current passes through the lines, warming them. Along the lines, the screen starts to clear because warming the glass makes the water evaporate as water vapour. Gradually, all the water droplets evaporate. The screen becomes clear, and so does the following traffic. The hotline has worked in just 2 minutes, 42 seconds.
Now let's see it working on the car.
You can't see anything through that rear window, so let's switch on the hotline. Again, the condensed water next to the lines evaporates first. But as the whole screen warms, all the water evaporates, so the screen is clear and safe for driving.
Thank you, Malcolm. Condensation and evaporation are both important in making our weather. The heat from the sun evaporates water from seas and lakes as water vapour. This makes clouds, and here's a speeded up film of clouds forming. From an aeroplane, we can see what it's like inside a cloud. It's full of tiny water droplets. Gradually, the droplets in the clouds get bigger and bigger until they fall as rain. And when the rain stops, the hot sun evaporates the water again. So that's how the weather happens. And the trouble is, it can be changeable. Oh. See you next week. Goodbye.